welcome to Books Unbound, the podcast where we unbind books to get to their hearts with your hosts, me and Raylene. But today, we also have Monica and Regan. Woo!
Hi. Hi.
Woo-hoo-hoo. All right,
Hello.
This is a first for Books Unbound. We've never had two guests on before.
Ooh.
We're going to see how it goes. We're also
pretty wild.
all recording with webcams right now, and I can see all three of these lovely ladies here. And I truly feel like I'm in one of the scenes in a teen movie where we're all on the phone talking after school.
That is the vibe.
Right? Where I've got a little bit
It's
of
like
that
we've never
vibe
had
going
so
on.
many friends in one place before. This is crazy.
No. Oh, man. All right. How are you guys doing? How are New York and Austin? Wow, international. From coast to coast is what we always say on the pod, because Raylene and me are on the opposite sides of Canada.
Yeah.
And now we're adding like a southern element. You've you've dragged us way
Yeehaw.
down there. That's cool.
They're really bringing that southern flair.
We really shouldn't talk about this as much as we do on the podcast, but how's the weather? Let's start there. How's the weather in Austin, Regan?
It's beautiful. Let me see. I think the high today is 74. So sunny, delightful. This is like one of the few only good months before it gets unbearably hot. So
Yeah.
March is actually like the best time of year in Texas, which is confusing to most other regions because normally it's just gross and wet and still kind of partially frozen. But March is pretty peak in Austin, Texas. Flowers are blooming, birds are chirping.
Oh, that's cool.
I did yard work yesterday. Big exciting stuff happening down here.
I was listening to an episode of your podcast. Regan and Monica have a podcast called The Cozy Club, which is the cutest thing ever. And on the podcast, you were talking, Regan, about how March is the best month. And I was like, wow, we're really living in
know.
different areas of the
It
planet.
was really
Yeah, it's snowing
disorienting.
where we
Because
are.
I moved to Chicago, and when I lived in New York, when I moved to Chicago, it was like my first winter. I was like, oh, March is right around the corner. We're all going to be good. And that's when I realized March is actually the worst month for a lot of people. And it was terrible. So, yes.
It's just slush. It's just
awful.
slush.
It's dirty.
It's just dirty. It's bad. You also have
Rainy.
all the fake hope. Where you're like, it's one sunny day and you're like, wait, maybe we made it. And then you're like, nope. We're still in the thick of it. How's New York, Monica? I feel like we have similar weather, but how's New York?
I think pretty similar. It's pretty miserable.
Yeah.
It's just been
A lot
like
of snow.
raining. I was camped out all night the other day for SNL. And just the whole time just being rained on.
I forgot that SNL was a thing that normal people could go to.
Yeah.
And then
really thought about
Monica, I know. And then Monica was like trying to get into SNL. I was like, oh yeah, you can go.
can.
It's hard, but you can go.
You can
And
do
you
it.
went.
I did.
And it was amazing. It was amazing.
Yeah, it was pretty phenomenal. Well, the group of friends that I went with, we have this mantra that we keep saying that we stole off of TikTok. We kind of say it like ironically. It's like, we are the luckiest girls in the world. Everything good happens to us. And we just kept saying it to each other. And there's this one point where we're sitting, it's like 11 p.m. It's raining. We're miserable. We're so cold. And my friend Liz is sitting there and she's like, we are the luckiest girls in the world. And then the tent that's like covering us completely just like this wave of water just comes down and falls right on her mid-sentence. So that's New York City in March.
Yep, that sounds about right, honestly. Raylene, how's BC?
Oh, I mean, it's just fine. Really wet. Really, really wet.
Yeah.
It's been raining, but I love the rain. Like, actually, it's been a nice change from the snow. So I'm okay with this. It's nice and lush over here. There's like grass is starting to grow in places I didn't know grass could grow around my house, and it's just like, all right, let's go. Spring. Here we go. Yeah,
You see, we all laugh, but weather is the ultimate icebreaker. We really did it. We really shifted in. Okay, well, we all met because of the bookish internet. We're a lot of bookish gals right here. And so we're so excited to talk to you guys about books and reading. So we have first I say lightning round. They're never fast at all, which is totally fine. Take your time. Give us your true answer. But we're going to start with trying to get to know you as readers, because a lot of our listeners might not know who you guys are. We want to introduce. Also, it's fun because they have heard us talk about our favorite books way too much.
Yes.
Like, way too much. So, Raylene, do you have our lightning round questions in front of you?
Nope. I sure don't.
No, you do not. No problemo. Let me pull them up. All right. So our first question, Monica, we'll go to you. I'll throw to you first on this one.
Okay.
What would you say your favorite book or books are?
Yes.
Please.
Yeah. So this has to be a plural.
Okay. No problem. We had someone do 5 once.
Oh, okay.
So
I'm not going to do 5. I might do 3. Okay, so the first one I want to talk about is this book called How to Build a Girl by Caitlin Moran.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a book that I read years ago, and it's like stuck with me for years, obviously. I would recommend it to anyone who read, loved, or watched Daisy Jones and the Sixth or Almost Famous, which are Almost Famous is one of my favorite films. So How to Build a Girl, it's set in the 90s, like early 90s in the UK. And we follow this girl from when she's a child up into her late teen years. And she is born and her family's really poor. And early on in her like adolescence, she has this really horrifically embarrassing moment. And then she like kind of goes on this journey to like rebrand herself or like recreate who she is, while also falling into this like the music scene of that time period and like wanting to be a journalist and kind of shaping herself basically to appeal to all of the men in this world. And it's a story all about like jadedness and, trying to take on the jadedness of like adults when you're a kid and wanting to be perceived as cool and a cool girl. And it's just like, it's a book that has like really stuck with me because of that. And just like, especially there's this one specific scene that it's like, it's kind of twee, but I love it. And I think about it every single time I'm on a flight. And it's this moment where the main character, she's on her first flight ever. And it's like after takeoff, and it's always like so rainy and miserable where she is. Like they take off, and like all of a sudden she's just like, it's just sunshine. And she has this like revelation moment where she's like, no matter like how gray of a day it is, like if you just go a little bit above the clouds, like there's still sunshine. And like it's like it's cheesy and it's cliche, but like there's something about that like every time I fly and I experience that, it's like yeah. So I love that book. It's so good. If you love music, if you love just like counterculture kind of stories, it's a great one. And just stories about girls in general. And then the other one I would say is If I Had Your Face by Frances Cha, which is it's a novel by a Korean author, one of my favorite books, obviously, because it's in this list. And in this one, it is you follow, I want to say 5 women who are all living in Seoul, and it's really just like a slice of life of like each of their lives and like how they intertwine and their friendships, and it's a look at class and beauty and how those things impact everyday life for these women. And it's obviously very much like specific to Seoul and that experience, but it very much translates. And I just like, there's something about that book that I love those women so much. And I love their stories. And like just the full depictions of them as people that has always really stuck with me. And then my last one is more of a fun one, and it's The King of Scars duology by Leigh Bardugo, who I just adore with my whole entire heart. And I think that duology is the best ending to a fantasy series that I've ever read. It's just genius. And like what she does in it, like absolute like operatic fantasy at its best. It's
I love that.
Brilliant. I love it.
I love the diversity of genre there. Like all 3 of those books are kind of very different genres, like different sections of the bookstore. I am curious, did you like the show version of How to Be a Girl or How to Be a Woman?
The movie,
what's it called?
How to Build a Girl.
How to Build a Girl.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, so they did do a film starring Beanie Feldstein, I think.
Yeah.
And I really liked it. I thought it was very British, like watching it, which I think is like how it should feel.
Yeah.
like I liked the book more. I thought the book, obviously the book is going to have more depth and like, you know, more stuff going on, but I thought the film was fun. I don't think it like performed very well, but
people gave it such
about
bad reviews.
Yeah.
I heard such bad things about it, so that's why I wanted to ask. I think people were being a little grumpy.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I loved the Angus Thongs and Perfect Snogging movie, and
so
people
good.
hated that movie for some reason, and I'm
Yeah.
like, I don't know, that was a
I'm
bop.
with you there.
That was a bop.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, Regan.
Oh, yes, me. Hello.
Regan, what are your favorite books or book? If you were able to pick one. No one ever can. It's fine.
I'm not going to pick one. It's impossible.
No.
But I think I read a lot of fantasy as a preface, so kind of a hard pivot into some heavy fantasy favorites. But first off, I have to talk about Robin Hobb, which is a collection of 12 books, maybe more, 15, something like that. We won't talk about all 15, but just the universe of it all is just, I personally feel like the perfect representation of like why I love fantasy, because a lot of people think fantasy is just adventure, which it is, but it can also have some really heavy themes and some really wonderful character work, and everything is always going to be representative of like our world and our life too, in a lot of ways, just embedded in a new place for these characters to interact with. And I just feel like her characterizations that she does throughout this entire universe, it's a collection of series. They're all kind of interconnected. Sometimes you're following the same characters. Sometimes you're following new characters. People cross paths. It's very good. But I think particularly her work on the chosen one trope particularly, and the trauma of having the responsibility of like a kingdom on your shoulders, and then ultimately not feeling you have personal choice, and also just like having to rationalize a lot of the pain of going on these quote unquote quests to save the land, is like something she constantly is dissecting throughout all of her series within this universe. It's also just like very classic. It has like the great medieval setting, the forest, the dragons, the magic. Like it has all of that, but it also has truly at the heart of it just some of the best written character arcs out there. And like the first trilogy, the Farseer trilogy, is good, but like it doesn't even like hold a candle to like what comes later. It's like that's like the foundation. And a lot of people know the Farseer trilogy, which is the Assassin's Apprentice, the Royal Assassin, and the Assassin's Quest. But like it just keeps building and it just keeps growing, and it's just incredible. Another fantasy series I love, which I think is one of the most unique from a literary point of view, like written, that I've read from a book. It's the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin, another one of my favorite authors. Each one of these won the Hugo and Nebula Award. And it's just such a unique and interesting series. Again, it's fantasy, but like what the author is exploring and dissecting like really transcends, I guess, what a lot of people might stereotype to the genre. The first book is written entirely in second person, which is a very unusual way to absorb a story. But it's kind of set in this world where it ends constantly. There's always some type of apocalyptic event which ends civilization. So humanity has kind of evolved in a way where communities and society exists to prepare for the eventual dying out of almost everyone, and we have to kind of like start from scratch again. And how the world usually ends has to center around the earth. There's these huge earthquakes, volcano eruptions, tsunamis, and the magic has to do with people who can actually control the power of the earth. But instead of being kind of looked at as possible saviors, they're looked at more as like something to be controlled and to be fearful of. And so you follow in the first one a variety of characters kind of in different points of their life. But I mean, this series, I mean, the types of conversation around like sexuality, race, gender, identity, motherhood, like there's so much in it, and it's so good and very, very unusual, I would say. So I think those two kind of come to mind. Like, gun to my head, what are my favorite series? It would be those two.
I love that we're going into genres that we do not talk about that often on the pod, because we have so many of our listeners that absolutely love fantasy, and they're always asking us for fantasy recs. And I don't read any fantasy. Raylene does read some, but not.
I've read like 5.
In the last few years, it's been like weirdly she hasn't been reading as much, right?
Yeah.
So no, this is really good. I know people are gonna be so excited. Okay, so this might have the same authors that you just mentioned, but we'd love to know who is your favorite author. This time let's start with Regan.
So I mentioned Robin Hobb and N.K. Jemisin, so I'll throw another obvious one into the mix. It's got to be Brandon Sanderson.
Classic.
My man, my boy. He is kind of like, he's a great writer. He can write wonderful and fascinating and really addicting plots, but what we really love about him is how prolific he is. If there's one person who's not going to make you wait, it's going to not be Brandon Sanderson. He's cranking out some great stories all the time. It feels like every other week I got a new book of his to read, but he's definitely one of my favorites too.
Do we know, does he do any ghostwriting or any co-writing? Or is he, that's crazy. That's amazing.
He must never sleep. He's probably a vampire.
He has a podcast too. Maybe we can get him on the podcast.
Yeah. He has a couple podcasts. Well, I'm like,
he's a video game coming out.
Yeah. He's
just on another level.
I'll never forget that, like, he had that Patreon announcement where he like was announcing these like books that he'd written, and just like over the course of the pandemic and over this video, he's like, I wrote this book and it's like this thick. Like, it's coming out. And then he's like, but then I also wrote this book.
Yes.
That was the most dramatic slapdown fest ever. It was just like boom, boom, boom. It was like building a tower in front of himself. That was
He's
nuts.
like, I didn't have to tour, so I wrote 4 extra books with my free time.
Like, what do you mean?
He should never tour again. That's crazy. All right. Monica, who would you say is your favorite author?
Yeah, so I also tried to get a different author. So I would say Libba Bray, one of my faves.
Oh,
I've followed him since like I was a teen, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like just the way that she writes characters, what really like strikes me, and also just like the way that she weaves her themes throughout the books. Like, I think about the Diviners series, which is one of my all-time favorite series. It's set in New York City, 1920s, and you follow this cast of characters who are all over the course of the story developing these like various abilities, like divine abilities, like being able to like read people's history by like touching them and things like that. But at its heart, the series is actually an exploration of the ghosts of America and our inability to really face our like the darkness of our history, and how by doing that we just like create even bigger issues that we never fully address. And it's so well done, so well executed, and I just like, that's what I love so much about the way that she writes, is the way that she like weaves her themes in throughout the books, but they never feel heavy-handed and they never feel condescending. They always just feel like natural and really like thought-provoking. So yeah, I love Libba. And she's also hilarious too. Like, all of her books are so funny.
Going Bovine is one of hers, right?
Yes, Going Bovine.
The concept that she called a book Going Bovine says everything you need to know.
Queens, I remember reading Beauty Queens when I was a teenager, and I was like, this is the greatest book ever.
Okay, so I think this will be a fun question. Favorite genre, or if you don't have like one that you would say is your favorite, maybe the genre you read the most. Monica, back to you.
Yeah, I would say I've come to the conclusion recently that I feel like I am pretty genreless. Like, I don't really have like, this is my genre and that's it. Like, I'll read anything from like Bukowski to middle grade fantasy, like, you know, Nevermore by Jessica Townsend. I think for me, what I look for is I want stories where people are doing something interesting in whatever genre they're in. And I think like, if that's sort of the idea that I'm hearing about, then I want to read it. And I love stories that are about like people, but through that, or where like they're exploring something very simple, but like through that are actually exploring a much larger concept about the world. So I don't know if that like makes sense, but I feel like that's the best way I can describe what I look for and what I read.
I love that.
Than a genre.
I was really recently on a different podcast, and they asked me the same question, and I was like, yes, I'll put it like how my best friend Raylene says it: unsound women that are bored and acting weird. I was like, it's not really a genre, but it is a vibe.
It's a vibe.
Regan, would you say, is it high fantasy, or is there a weird plot twist coming?
Well, okay, I think if you look at the volume, I mean, I read a lot of books a year, probably like 70 or 80, so like pure volume, proportionally mostly fantasy. I love fantasy. I love reading all the different genres within fantasy. I'm not necessarily picky. There's like so many different flavors you can have. But honestly, I also would say with that other large chunk, I read actually also very broadly. There's no genre that I'm uninterested in besides maybe like one or two. Like I read literary fiction, I read middle grade, I read historical fiction. Like there's, if it's similar to Monica, like if it's interesting and if it sounds like something that's going to compel me to pick it up, I like it quite a bit. Like I really like, what's the memory police's genre? Speculative fiction. I love speculative fiction a lot. And I also really love books that play with point of view. So lots of different characters in any type of setting, where there's kind of like this winding thread line. I always really enjoy. And you find that a lot in like whodunit murder mysteries. You find that a lot in like Emily St. John Mandel books, which is literary fiction. Like I like kind of like that. I just like lots of point of views, which you get a lot in fantasy books, which you read from a lot of characters. But you can also have that experience in so many different genres as well.
That's really interesting. You know why that's interesting? Because it's kind of the opposite for me. I get confused once more than 3 characters are in. I'm like, oh,
I'm like, give me 30 characters. Like, give me like one page with one character. I just think it's interesting because I love this idea of like intertwining fate and lives.
Yeah,
and, like,
totally.
This sort of tapestry of experience, if you will. And I like that across all genres, I guess.
The movie that I think did that best was Love Actually. Am I right or am I right? There's so many. When you realize how the characters cross over, I remember being like 8 and being like, they all know each other somehow.
Fair enough.
Yeah, when I first saw Crazy Stupid Love, that was the same thing. I was like, wait.
Oh, that
wait
one?
a minute.
Yeah.
What's going on?
Yes.
That's
that fight scene.
Incredible. Impeccable.
They're like, wait, you? Huh? You?
One of my favorite examples of that in like books is this book called We Are Not Free by by Tracy Chee. And it's this book it's a historical fiction book, and every single chapter is a different character within this friend group. And they're all Japanese teens who are forced into, what were they called? The like
internment camps.
Yes, who are forced into internment camps. And it's so beautifully done because like by the end it becomes like they become a chorus of voices. Also, I will say like I read that book and I sobbed every single chapter.
Yeah, that sounds
it was rough.
That would really hit hard.
But like a literary fiction one that maybe I feel like Raylene, A Visit from the Goon Squad is like a great example of like
A Visit from I haven't read it, but I have it on my shelf.
Yeah. It's like all these disparate, I love when there's like a lot of different point of views, and in Visit from a Goon Squad too, it's like you don't even have this clear thread of like, it doesn't even feel linear, like you're jumping all over the place and everyone is connected, but like you might be in present day, then you might jump 40 years in the past, and then you might, you know what I mean, and you might be, I don't know. I love just kind of dropping into people's lives and then dropping out. Also loved If I Had Your Face for like that sort of reason, this true slice of life experience. So yeah,
I love that. That's great.
Yeah.
All right, this is a big one. Favorite bookshop. I'm so excited to hear what you pick. Regan, you made an intriguing face just then. Let's start with you.
I just lived in a lot of places.
I know, it's tough.
It's hard to narrow it down. Like in Austin, no question, Book People. It's like classic.
Okay.
Biggest indie bookstore in Texas, multi-story, a beautiful experience, amazing science fiction fantasy section, which is hard to find in bookstores. Normally they're very tiny. But like, I don't know, there's some really good ones in Brooklyn that I fell in love with when I lived there. Like Books Are Magic was like my local bookstore for a long time, and it is, as the name implies, rather magical. But there's, it's hard. I'm going to just go with those.
Those are good picks, though.
For the sake of brevity.
I've been to Austin, and I did not go to that bookshop. So I have massive regrets right now. It was a very quick little trip, but still, massive regrets. All right. Monica, what did you pick?
So I have 2. I'd say the first one, no bookstore has ever been able to top, especially in curation and organization, for me, McNally Jackson, which is a chain of bookstores in New York City. And the absolute best one, in my opinion, is McNally Jackson Seaport, which is one of the most beautiful. Yes. Oh my gosh, you went. I forgot.
It's hard to agree.
Ariel talks
so
I've been trying to tell people that I think that that's going to become the newest, most iconic bookshop in Manhattan, because in New York, because it's just like so stunning, but it's sort of tucked away a bit. So I don't think people have caught on to it as fast as they should of just how beautiful it feels to be in that shop.
Yeah, I feel like Seaport is like this whole area that like has just been like completely redeveloped over the past few years. And so like, there's a lot of like cute little shops right there that just popped up. And just like the area in general, like they do a lot of concerts like on the piers there. So it's like just such a fun little neighborhood. But yeah, it's not like really on people's radar, I feel like, when they come to the city and stuff, but it is one of the, just like walking into that bookstore, if you feel like you're in Maine or something.
Yeah,
like it's so beautiful and
it's also
old.
big.
Yeah, it's huge. It's 2 stories. It has an adorable cafe, and it has large, comfy couches to sit in. The bookcases in it are like the super kind of, like, I love McNally because you could just like weave through all the bookcases, but also the way that they organize things, I love. Like the way that they curate their tables, like they always have just the most interesting selection of books, I feel like. And they really prioritize like international fiction, so you can go and find like a specific section that's like, here's all the Korean translated novels, and I love that about them. So any McNally Jackson, but especially that. And then my other favorite one is probably the prettiest bookstore I've ever been to. It's also New York City. New York City is just in my heart, a lot of good books. The best city for books. Well, I guess London probably would fight me on that, but it's in the French Embassy, and it's called Albertine. So Albertine, it's books translated. They sell only books that are either in French or translated from French to English. And that's cool. Going in there, it's just you do have to go through the French embassies. You have to go through security. But it's just so magical inside. Like, it's super dark and moody. It's small. There's 2 floors. And the upstairs, you, like, feel like you're in, like, some wizard's office or something. It's just so...
It's beautiful.
It's stunning. And, like, the ceiling is, like, painted this, like, celestial... Has, like, the celestial... I don't know what
I don't even know what to call that. Yeah, like a mural?
Mural, yeah.
A sky mural.
It's just so lovely. So if you love translated fiction... I highly recommend both of those places. And also McNally now has their own like imprint that they're doing. Which they're just like publishing really interesting fiction.
And they're so pretty. We cannot underscore enough that they've gone with like, because it's like a line. So they're doing like a collection that all of the covers have the same like cover design concept. So stunning. They have like the half sleeve or the 3/4 sleeve thing, and like a bit pokes. They're so beautiful. You know what's funny about Albertine, Monica? You took me there last year.
Yeah.
I had not been, but you're like, we have to go. This is the prettiest one.
Monica took me there too. I feel like
Monica's spreading the good word. That's so
She's
funny.
Like, I have a place I need to take you. And it is really beautiful.
All right. What are you guys currently reading? I'm excited to hear about this. What's currently on the docket for you, Regan?
I just finished. I was kind of in a bout of... I was in betwixt 3 books, but I finished them all. So I'm now just on the one. I just started. Okay. I'm like 5 pages in, so I don't have very strong opinions yet. But it's The Adventures of Amina El-Sarafi, which is one of my most anticipated releases of this year. Yeah. It's like a pirate seafaring novel about an older woman, actually, in a fantasy setting in the Indian Ocean. And she's basically going out on like one last sort of adventure to try to find like a lost crewmate.
Classic! Yeah. One last job!
I know. And I love it because it's centering like an older female character. And I feel like that is a rarity in fantasy or just in a lot of books, if we're being honest. And she's like experienced and badass and like knows what she's doing. And I think it's just going to be a good time. And I'm looking forward to first 5 pages. Superb.
Great start. Monica, what are you reading?
Yeah, so I'm in the middle of a couple different books right now, unfortunately.
Classic. Join the club. That's me all the time.
Genuinely. So the first one is this book called YN by Esther Yi, and it's fascinating. So the whole premise is that we follow this woman who, at the very beginning of the novel, it's a short little book, but she falls into the fandom for this K-pop group. And it's so for me there are a lot of books out there that like are about K-pop or talking about either being a K-pop star or K-pop fan. But they're all very fun, they're all very lighthearted looks at that. And this book is kind of exploring the darker side of it, and I wouldn't say darker side of it, but the more like all-consuming nature of being in that sort of environment and the way that it. If you've ever been in like deep in a K-pop group, or really I guess any fandom, and just like that that sense of like feeling like you know someone but you don't, and even just like the specific way in which K-pop stars really like feed into that sort of like connection that you're meant to have with the artist. It's just exploring a lot of that in this really interesting way that I hadn't read. The only other book that I've had do something like that is If I Had Your Face by Frances Cha, because one of the characters in that is like a hardcore K-pop fan. So if anyone listening has read that and they liked that sort of subplot, then YN is a great option for like something that explores that a little bit more in depth.
Raylene just read Idol Burning. Have you heard of that one?
I haven't.
Oh.
Ray, what exactly was the plot on that one?
With that one, it's about a girl who is super obsessed with this one specific member of I think it's J-pop group. And she's so obsessed with him. And then at the beginning of the book, everybody finds out that he assaulted a fan. And they're like, is this real? Like, did this happen? And so she starts like questioning things, but then people are like, are you still going to keep following him? Like, are you still a fan of him? And she's like, I will stand by him no matter what. And so it's her just trying to like reconcile her feelings of like, what does that mean to her that happened? And it was really good.
Okay, I just wrote that down. I need that.
Monica, I feel like you're kind of into like the intricacies of like social relationships, like parasocial. Like I just feel like I'm not to say you haven't been into it, but it just feels especially topical at the moment, no?
I feel like it's always been. I don't know. Yeah. I've always been really interested in social media. But the interesting thing about YN is that if you grew up on the internet, you probably are familiar with the term YN, which is like really popular. Or if you grew up in like fandom spaces. So YN in fan fiction is if you write fan fiction and you see YN, it's like that's where you put your name. So it's like you can have like a fanfic with like your favorite celebrity or your favorite character, and then like the YN section, that's you putting in your name. And the book is written as like her writing this YN fan fiction, and then also her sort of like descending into this like K-pop world. So it's, you know, it's having the reality and the fiction side.
That sounds really good.
That sounds so
really
good.
Fascinating.
Right up my street.
I weirdly have another book that fits this.
Yeah.
And it's one I picked up a couple months ago, and I haven't read it yet, so I can't recommend it, but it's called Astral Season, Beastly Season.
Okay.
First of all, love
Great
the
name.
cover. Obsessed with the cover, the name, the whole thing. It's Japanese translated, so it is J-pop as well. But it's very similar to the Idol Burning that Raylene read. It's about two teenage characters who, it says two high school boys approaching the age in life when they must choose what kind of people they want to be. Classic. But basically, their favorite idol that they're completely obsessed with kills and murders his girlfriend, and they decide that they love him so much that they're going to take the blame for the murders. And so it's again about this like insane parasocial relationship between these fans and this idol. And I've been meaning to read it ever since I bought it because it sounds so good and the reviews are good and stuff. But yeah, I haven't read it, but it sounds like apparently it's a genre.
Apparently. Yeah, I just wrote that one down too.
Yeah, that's also amazing.
Yeah.
Stressful, but amazing, yeah.
And then the other book I'm currently reading is Slouching Towards Bethlehem by Joan Didion, which
totally
I've only read like bits of before, so I'm trying to read the whole thing. And that one I'm reading more so because it kind of aligns with the writing project that I'm currently working on. Not that I'm trying to say that I'm trying to, you know, write the new Slouching Towards Bethlehem.
Joan Didion's on the podcast. The next Joan Didion.
But the thing that I love about that is that she, you know, that whole time period of like beat poets, that whole beat scene was so idolized, so romanticized, still is. And the way that she wrote about it as like this very ugly thing is like basically trying to reveal the truth of like this seemingly very romantic time for creativity, I just think is so powerful. And I just love the way she writes in general, and just like the way she writes these people, like shows these people like real stories. And that's something that I am just really inspired by right now in what I've been writing. So
that sounds fantastic. I'm really hoping to finally read a Joan Didion this year, because the only one I half read was The Year of Magical Thinking, and it was so sad I had to stop. I was like, I can't.
Yeah,
it's so sad. Okay, our final question in our quote-unquote lightning round, which I told you is never lightning round, is what is your mashed potato book? Either one that you're still dying to get to or one that you've recently tackled. And Raylene, for all of our new listeners, because when we get guests on, we often have your audience come and listen, and they're like, what's a mashed potato book? A fair question, Raylene.
Yeah, this was a term that we coined on our second ever episode of the podcast, and it has stuck with us since then. And it's basically the concept that, say you have a plate of food that's mashed potatoes and like vegetables or whatever, and people, mashed potatoes are the best food, you save them for last, and by the time you get to them, though, they might be cold. And so we translated that into books, meaning a book that you maybe are saving for later because you think you're going to love it or you're going to love it, and then sometimes by the time you get to read it, either you're like, why did I take so long, or it wasn't even that good, I should have just read it at the beginning. So it can mean a lot of different things. So, and the question is, do you have a book like that you've tackled recently, or is there one that you just keep putting off, something you've been meaning to read for the past 8 years but haven't?
Regan, do you want to start us off with our mashed potato-ness?
I have one, and I feel like it stares at me all the time. I mean, I have many. My TBR pile is long. But I think recently I have to give it to A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor
I have
Towles.
that too.
Right?
I've been meaning to read it for years.
I have, and like structurally, like the concept of it, it's like, oh, I really feel like I'm going to like this book. It's an interesting time in history. It's structurally something I feel like I'm going to like. I've put it on so many TBRs. I never get to it. I'm always like, this winter, this feels like a cold book. I never get to it.
I do the same thing. I keep
March.
telling myself I'm going to read it each winter, and then I just don't.
And now it's March. I still haven't read it. But the concept of the book is it's set in Russia right after the revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution. And basically, we follow an unrepentant aristocrat, and he's put on house arrest in this hotel, which is like right across the street from the new seat of government. And so he can't leave. So he's in this attic room, and he's basically supposedly watching some of the most, tumultuous years in Russian history kind of go by his window, and he's writing about it. And the book is also about his relationship with like other people that exist within the hotel. And again, we've already established like, I love multi-POV books, lots of characters. I also studied history in school, so I love historical settings quite a bit, especially when they're kind of have a different point of view. Not to say this is a work of nonfiction by any means, but it's just an interesting time period in history, kind of being explored in a fiction setting. I have so many Amor Towles books, actually, and I haven't gotten any of them.
Uh-oh. I do that too. I like to collect authors that I just think I'm going to love, and then I'm like, why do I have 5 and I haven't even read one yet?
I will say,
I'm notorious
I bought the entirety of the Neapolitan Quartet by Elena Ferrante, and I finally read the first one, and it absolutely slapped. It was so good. I was like, okay, I bought all of these. I like completely invested and committed into thinking I was going to like this. Waited years to finally get to it, and I finally read the first one last year, and I was like, oh yeah, this was actually incredible. This was 10 out of 10.
You know how I know that those books must be good? Because they're so huge. Obviously, they're like such giant, like famous books, but they have such bad covers. Yeah. So I'm like, it must be real. Like, it must be real that these books are high quality.
Yeah. It's so funny. But it's just so good. Anyway, I could go on and on about My Brilliant Friend. It was like one of the best books I've read in years.
Me and Raylene want to buddy read it because we're like, it's about friends. But I think that's actually probably holding us back because we never find the time to buddy read it.
Yeah, buddy reading is hard. And the friendship in it, too, is so interesting. It's very dynamic. It's not just like, I don't know.
This summer, Ariel, let's read it this summer because it feels like a summer book.
All right,
there you go.
We'll do it. In 3 years, we'll loop back when we finally read it. Monica, what is a mashed potato book for you?
Yeah, so this one, it's kind of funny. It's definitely The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by Victoria Schwab, which is like genuinely a mashed potato book in the sense that like I got a copy of that. So right before like quarantine happened, like the end of the world, March, I think like February. No, actually it was the day of. It was the day that they announced that COVID was a pandemic. I got invited to an event with Victoria Schwab, and they were giving out early copies of The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. And I think these were like some of the first copies that anyone ever got. And so I got this book. I had been so excited for it for already so long because I love Victoria, and the story just like sounded like right up my alley. Got it, was so excited to read it. And then, you know, the end of the world happened and I wasn't really reading much of anything. And then I just didn't read it. I didn't pick it up. And then it came out and it like got so much like hype. Like just so, and I feel like once that happens for me, it's like, it's hard for me to not like put that pressure onto the book. Like I feel pressure then. Yeah. So I was like, well, now I can't read it. I have to wait. And I've just been waiting ever since. I literally have like multiple copies of this book. And I have not read it. And I at this point, I'm like, I don't know if I can ever read it.
Right, that's the thing. Sometimes a mashed potato book will be mashed forever. It'll just never happen. And that's the sad thing. Because what if that's like your new favorite book, but you'll never know?
What if I feel even worse so if I hate it?
Oh, exactly.
It would be worse if you hate it.
That's what makes it scary. That's why you put it off. A lot of the times, like it's like, oh, I could love it, but I also might hate it, and then all of this like anticipation,
this feeling.
Yeah.
I feel that way with Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow.
I
Gabrielle Zevin she's an author that I have loved since I was 13 because she used to write YA books, and it was one of the first YA books that I thought was like an incredible book. Memoirs of a Teenage Amnesiac. Like it was like one of my favorite books
in middle school.
Like
it was so
made
good.
such a big impact on me for some reason. I was like, I'm obsessed with this book. And then she wrote some more YA books and like Elsewhere, which a lot of people read, which is like a really weird book about when you die, you reverse backwards and then you're a baby and you get sent back to Earth. It's like a bizarre concept. And then she wrote the
Story Life
the
of
bookshop
one. Yeah,
that one, which was so strange to me because I was like, oh my god, you were a YA author, now you're an adult author, and that book did so good, and now it has a movie, and now Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow is like one of the biggest books from last year. And it's basically like when your favorite band suddenly goes mainstream. You're like, yes, I am happy for the success, I don't begrudge it, but I also now I feel like I can't interact with the books and the author in the same way. Like that intimacy is sort of different. Damn, I have a lot to work through, apparently. All right, it's time to jump into some recommendations. So we love picking custom recommendations to suit our guests, and I think we got some fun ones for you guys today. Raylene, I know you have these in front of you, so I'll throw it over to you.
Yeah. So let's start at the top here. So this first one comes from Isabella, who says, "Hey dudes, so I'm typically not a fantasy reader, but lately I've been craving a fun adventure to take my mind off the real world. Witches, fairies, pirates, the whole thing. Thing is, I know I can't commit to a series, so I'm looking for something that can be read on its own, also as diverse and less heterosexual as possible. Hee hee." Love hee hee.
Fair enough.
All right, Monica, let's start over here. What do you got?
Yeah, so one of my favorite books that I read, I think this was last year, is The Chosen and the Beautiful by Naivo. And it's a standalone. It's a retelling of The Great Gatsby. And it's so magical. If you want something like magical and whimsical, highly recommend it. I also think that it does such a good job of retelling Gatsby. So it retells Gatsby from the perspective of, I'm going to forget her name.
Jordan Baker.
Jordan Baker, yes, from the perspective of Jordan. But Jordan, in this version, she is Asian. She is also queer. And there's just like a lot of queer characters in it. And I just feel like Naivo does such a good job of like honoring sort of the original text of The Great Gatsby while also just like fully expanding on it and like asking broader questions about like the women's lives that aren't really discussed as much or as blatantly in the actual Great Gatsby novel. But then also the magic in it is just so unlike really anything that I've read in a while. It's just like very whimsical. It's more of a soft fantasy, and that doesn't really have like hard rules. It's more about like the vibe. Like if you just want something where like you are just falling into like an ethereal sort of what is real, what isn't kind of space, then I feel like you like The Chosen and the Beautiful. And it is a standalone. So
perfect.
And it's pretty short.
It is. It's short. It's a great
fantasy.
like ease into fantasy, especially if you don't normally read fantasy, because it has that, contemporary side of things.
Yeah. Especially if you like The Great Gatsby, I feel like it's fun.
Yeah, and a lot of people do like The Great Gatsby.
Or
so
if you
that might
hate The
be-
Great Gatsby.
Or if you hate, I don't like The Great Gatsby. I did read that, and I do feel like it
There
made
you
me
go.
like The Great Gatsby more. I don't know. It like
that's
helped
interesting.
Oh, that's
a little bit, 'cause
interesting.
yeah. I don't hate The Great Gatsby. I just think it's just people. Anyway, yeah, whatever.
no.
Breaking news: Regan
wanna
hates
fight.
The Great Gatsby.
You've heard it
It's
here
like
first.
everyone loves The Great Gatsby, you know?
Yeah.
And
Well,
I'm
that's
like,
like- I
this is
think
a
that's
good
part
book, but
Yeah. I feel like that's part of like what makes the book interesting, because it's as much like an homage to The Great Gatsby as much
Yeah.
as it is a critique of it.
yeah, exactly. It's a really
Yeah,
interesting
that's a good way to put it.
reimagining of that
Reimagining.
text, especially because it's like such
Yeah.
a well-known text. Mine is also short and a standalone, and it's going to be Nettle and Bone by T. Kinfisher. This is like another really whimsical story. It's very much like a modern dark fairy tale, I would say. So it very much is like a true quest and adventure story. It's short too. It's like 250 pages, so you can read it like very, very quickly. It basically follows our main character who is trying to save her sister from a very bad marriage. Her husband is abusive. Her previous sister has already been killed by this guy. He's from a very powerful kingdom. And she knows it's going to be like a very difficult situation to try to save her. So she basically seeks out an individual called the Bone Witch, and the Bone Witch gives her like 3 impossible tasks, which she very quickly accomplishes like right at the beginning of the book. So now this Bone Witch is like, well, I guess I gotta help you. So then they kind of go out on this venture with her demonic chicken who comes along, and then slowly along the way they run into like other characters who like join their group. It's, I think, the perfect combination of like bitter and sweet. It's emotional. It has a lot of weight. Like obviously a lot of the topics are not light ones, but I also feel like it really captures this whimsy of this magical place. It has like fairies and all different types of things. The landscape is really well crafted, but I just think like the different relationships and all the different characters are just like a really lovely experience. And I think, I don't know, it's just like a very classic fairy tale-esque fantasy story. It's very approachable, and again, not long at all. It's a quick read.
The one that I picked, and I did have it here once upon, there it is. Mr. Stardust by Mr. Neil Gaiman. So I really do not read a lot of fantasy. And so the reason that I picked this one is because I really enjoyed this, and I found it really easy to get into as a person who doesn't read a lot of fantasy. If you've seen the movie version and you liked it, then I think you'll like the book as well, because they are very similar and they're kind of fantastical, whimsical, and like you said, Reagan, like fairy tale-esque vibes. It does, though. This, I remember this being so weird because I read this for a class called Fantasy and Fandom. It starts with like a sex scene, like really early on, and I was like, the movie was a children's movie. What's happening? But like basically, it's like how the main character is born and stuff. Like it's like all really important to the plot or whatever. So it is a little bit more adult than the movie. But that being said, it's such a fun romp, and I actually think that Neil Gaiman, when he wrote it, probably was aiming it as a generalist read. Like, I don't think he was trying to go really hard, like how he has with maybe like Sandman, which is like this giant grasping universe. With Stardust, it's just like there's a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it's very much a journey for one character to like become a hero and go from being sort of like somebody who's really downtrodden and everybody walks all over to being like the hero of his story and stuff. So I really loved this book. I also love that movie. I don't know why. That movie just really sparks joy in my little heart.
I love it. It's very good.
Right?
Good
It's
one,
so
good
cute.
one.
Okay. Raylene, what did you pick?
Well, I'm going to talk about a book that I talk about all the time. It's one of my favorite fantasy books, one of the few I've read in the past couple of years, and that's The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. Have you guys read it?
Classic.
I have.
Okay, Monica, you've got to read it. So good. So this one is huge. So unlike all of your guys' picks, it is a large fantasy book, but it packs so much in that it almost feels like you're reading a series all in one book, and it's so awesome that it does that. But it's about a lot of things, but mainly it's about this kind of war between the east and the west of this world, and it's all about dragons. One side loves dragons and they're like gods to them, and the other side hates dragons and wants them all to die. So that you've got that aspect going on, but then there's also lots of different characters who are all in different places in the world. We've got like assassin assassins and sorcerers. There's a queen, like the whole one side is ruled by this queen, and so one of the characters is protecting her, and maybe there's a little romance there. So there's some queer relationships in the book, which I absolutely loved, and it is quite diverse. But like I said, there's lots of different characters as well, so you're getting lots of different perspectives just on the world and on, you know, the whole situation with the dragons. So super awesome. And it is technically a standalone. A prequel did just come out, but you can read this by itself. I haven't read the other book yet, but I don't think you have to read both to, you know, enjoy the whole world. But if you want to, there is
their own
another book.
Standalones.
Yeah, that's what it seems like. Yeah.
I've now
have you read
both? Yeah, I have.
You've officially read
actually
both.
like the prequel
Raylene has
more.
been stuck in a pre-order nightmare because our main bookshop in Canada, Chapters, had got a cyber hack about a month ago and has failed to recover. Like, it's
Everything
been
was
over
shut
a
down
month.
basically for the
Like,
past
if
month.
you go into the store, they can't give you your points. If you try and look up your account, you can't look at your orders. Like, it's like a giant mess. And
I
so
even just
all of
asked,
these
like,
pre-orders,
are you guys going to be sending out books that have been pre-ordered? And they were like, we cannot confirm or deny that we're going to do that. I'm
my
like, just tell me.
God.
So
anyway,
I think
Raylene's
it
book
finally
got
shipped.
caught
I
in
should be
hell.
getting it this week, but I wanted to read that book 2 weeks ago. You know, I really wanted to read that book 2 weeks ago.
we're shaking our heads over here.
That's awful.
It's devastating.
It's a catastrophe is what it is, yeah. All right, Ray, what's our next one?
Okay. The next one is from Sarah. And I think we're getting to this recommendation a little late because it's about holiday gift giving, but let's just forget about that for a second and just try and help Sarah. So she says, I work in a bookstore and I'm looking for a go-to recommendation for the person who says they like everything, but really don't mean it. Most people don't actually like fantasy or sci-fi, which is what I prefer to read. So I'm looking for some general fiction recs I can recommend as good gifts for the holidays.
Reagan, start us off. I'm just doing it randomly.
I have Hamnet for this. Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. I think this is a great crowd pleaser book. I also think you can read this book in lots of different ways that would make a lovely reading experience. The audiobook is incredible. I also think because it centers such a famous figure, which is Shakespeare, I think that would be like kind of an in for anyone. Maybe if they don't read super frequently, they'd be like, oh, I'm intrigued by this. But Hamnet is one of the prettiest books I've read in a while. And I think conceptually it's just really, really interesting. And it centers Shakespeare, but like not really. It's about him and his family, but more specifically his wife, Agnes. And it has kind of a disjointed narrative style. You're kind of jumping forward and back in time. You watch this young tutor, who is Shakespeare, as we know, fall in love with Agnes, who's like this kind of eccentric older woman. They get married, they start a family, they have children. And then you also see as the plague comes to their doorstep and tragedy strikes. It's like much more about like family. It's much more about mourning. It's interesting because it's like it centers such a famous figure, but it could really be about anyone and like any family at almost any point in time, because it's so much more about like the connection and like the love of the family. And again, it's just really beautifully written, and how it's kind of structured, I feel like really propels you through the book too.
I have had that one on my shelf for a while. It's becoming a mashed potato read, so you might have just convinced me to bump it up my list, actually.
It's good. It's not too long either. The audiobook is also excellent.
Okay, I gotta find a time. Monica, what do you got?
I just changed my answer. Did I take? So I think like, okay, if you're buying like a book as a gift for someone, that's so hard, right? Because like
It's so hard.
you don't know what they've read or any of that stuff. But I think like one of the easy picks is to kind of like just look at like what's going on in culture right now, like what's popular, what's being adapted, and kind of trying to use that, because everyone kind of wants to read, you know, the hot thing. So obviously, you know, Taylor Jenkins Reid, I feel like is like a safe bet. You know, most people seem to like her books, Evelyn Hugo, Daisy Jones. But the book that I would actually recommend has also been adapted. And it's the one that is probably the most obvious pick for me. It's Pachinko by Min Jin Lee, which is another one of my all-time favorite books.
Yeah.
It's a great
Historical
book.
fiction, intergenerational trauma discourse. So like if they were into everything everywhere all at once, this is a great one to give them. Or if they want to watch the Apple TV adaptation of Pachinko, get them the book first. And yeah, it's basically a story about this family who, during the colonization of Korea, that was happening by Japan. We follow this family who, starts off in Korea and then moves to Japan, and just like their experience as a Korean family, and just like the experience of like the racism that Koreans face in Japan and the discrimination and all of that, and just like how that extends from generation to generation within this family. And it's so beautiful and so well done. And I feel like it's the kind of book I also like. For me, like, I love long books as gifts. Like, there's just something about it. So
yeah,
I'd also
it's
just,
also
like,
very
wanted
readable
to...
though. Like, it might look kind of intimidating and seem kind of intimidating because of the subject matter, but it's actually like, I found myself flying through that book when I read it.
It's one of those books too, the kind of going back, it has so many different perspectives, so you're jumping through like a large expanse of time, and the chapters, it's like heavy, very emotional, and that slice of life, and the way that you're kind of dropped into all these different characters' life, but you see this like interconnected thread throughout it too. It's very good. Fantastic book. 10 out of 10.
It's another one that it's sitting back there, you guys. It's sitting back there.
She started
I really
it.
need to get to it.
Didn't quite get there.
Okay, the book that I picked for this one is Albatross by Terry Fallis, one of my favorite books of all time. Nobody's heard of it because it's Canadian and it's not published widely outside of Canada, but you can order it online, you guys. This is a goofy book that I truly cannot imagine somebody disliking it. Like, either you're gonna like it or you're gonna love it. Like, maybe not everyone's gonna love it, but I just really feel like everyone's gonna like it. I do feel very confident about that. It's really goofy. So basically, it's about a character. It starts when they're a teenager. They're in gym class and they get a new gym teacher who's this like interesting older woman who's like now having to teach. She used to be a golf pro. And she's like randomly reading a scientific journal one day, and it's this like wacky scientist guy who says, if you measure the human body and like you just take all of these measurements, there's like hundreds of measurements, and then you put it into like a little thingy and it hit enter, it will give you all of these scores for different sports. So it'll be like Ariel is 12% good at basketball, 14% good at golf, like all of these different numbers, but it will let you know like what sports you would actually be good at. And so she decides to do that with their class as like a fun random activity. They measure our main character and he gets like in the 99 percentile for golf. Like, he should be a pro golfer. And they're like, okay, let's try it out, right? And he's like, I've never played golf. Like, there's no way that I'm good at golf. They go, and he's instantly, automatically incredible at golf. And so the story is the journey of him becoming a pro golfer, even though he hates golf. He thinks it's stupid. He absolutely detests it. But he's like, but I'm really good at it. I get so much praise for it, fame for it, money for it. What he really wants to be doing is being an author. That's his dream, like to write. So it's this really fun story because it's goofy and a little silly, but it's also a really beautiful story about somebody who has to pick like their passion over what they're necessarily good at. And like being a writer is going to be the much more difficult route. But is that what he should do? Or should he follow the thing that he's naturally good at? I mean, it's stunning. I love it. I'm obsessed with this book. Everyone should read it. Okay, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Raylene, what did you pick as an everything book?
Yes, well, I decided to go with one of the best books that I read in the past couple of years that is general fiction and I feel like could appeal to a lot of people, and that is There by Tommy Orange. Man, this book is so good. I mean, we're bringing back, once again, the large cast of characters. Regan, I think you'd like it if you haven't read it. It's about, I think, 10. It's so good. So there's either 10 or 12, I can't remember, different characters who are all connected in some way or another. They're from an indigenous community. They're all on their way to this big powwow. That's what everybody is doing. They're planning on going into it in one way or another. Some people are like, have to figure out how they're going to get there and all that stuff. But that's like the central plot, is they're all trying to get to this event. And you get to know all the characters individually and how they're connected to each other. And it's just beautifully written. This is his debut novel also, which is just crazy to me. And it is a little bit devastating at times. So just be forewarned for that. It would be a sad recommendation a little bit, but it's not completely sad the whole time. But it's gorgeous and a very quick read as well. So that would be a good kind of general recommendation.
I think we nailed it. You guys, I thought that was a golden round that we just did.
Yeah.
All right, to cap it off and to finish us off here, we have one specific recommendation request from each of you guys. So we're going to hear about one more book from each of you. Raylene, let's start with Monica's one.
All right. So this one comes from Claire, who says, "Hello, I'm currently an English teacher in the UK, but in February I'm moving to start a new teaching job in South Korea and have many Korean adventures. I'm looking for a book that is set in South Korea or by a Korean author. I've already read Kim Ji-young and Crying in H Mart."
I love Kim Ji-young. That's a great one.
I actually have Kim Ji-young here because I read it because of you, Monica, and I loved
And then
that
I read
book.
it because of you reading it.
Yeah.
It's a train.
Nothing makes me happier. So I have two. So the first one I'd recommend, I actually picked up because Yoongi from BTS was reading it and loved it. And it's called Almond. And it's by,
Yes.
I have it right here. So here it is. Almond
Yes.
by Won Pyong-sun. And this book, it interestingly enough, was actually published in Korea as for kids. It's a middle grade novel. But here in the US, when it was translated, it's published as literary fiction. I don't know what that says about the U.S., but here we are.
They're scared.
The premise is that we follow this young boy who doesn't feel emotions. He doesn't really, that's sort of the premise. At the very beginning, he witnesses something really horrific, traumatic happening in front of him. And then the rest of the book is him growing up and trying to navigate the world. And it's this book where, because you have that sort of lack of one sense, it almost like heightens all of the senses. Like when you're reading it, because he is not feeling, or at least depicted to be feeling anything like on the page, you feel it so much more. And so it's really powerful in that sense. And it's a really fascinating story about just like growing up and friendship and emotions. And yeah, so I love it. It's a great one. It is dark. It's pretty dark. There's some pretty gruesome scenes that happen in it. So putting that out there. And then the other one I would recommend is this book that I've lent out. So I don't have a copy to hold up, but it's called Winter in Sukcho.
Yes.
Have you read it?
I bought it with you actually at Albertine, and I haven't read it yet, but Raylene just read it like 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, and it's the same thing. Like, I got it because Ariel bought it because of you, and then it came back, and I was like, I need that book, so we're all connected. It was awesome.
It's so good. The author she's Korean, but she's French-Korean, and she lives in Switzerland, I believe.
Yeah.
And so the book itself, super international. But the book itself is just this really quiet exploration of sort of being out of place, like no matter where you are. So the Sokcho is like this seaside town. It's this place where people go for vacation normally. And the time that it's set in is winter. So it's kind of like off season. It's near the border of North and South Korea. The main character is sort of always feeling othered because even though she is Korean, and in the West you think like, oh, well, all Koreans are Korean, there's still like that deep sort of rooted, but you're not really Korean sense because she is French, she's half. And so like just this whole, the whole like concept or theme of the book is just like creating this feeling of like otherness or always feeling like out of place, and not really a lot happens in it, so you kind of have to be okay with the book where nothing happens. But if you're good with that, it is beautifully written. It's very short, and one of my favorites.
Okay, fine, I'll read it.
You have to. It's so short, Ariel. I read it in like a couple of hours. Like you just sit down. It's very easy to fly through.
I have no excuse.
You'll love it.
All right, our final one is for Regan. Raylene, if you'll read it out.
All right, so this one is from Faith, who says, so I love watching Ariel renovate her home on her YouTube, so I was wondering if you could recommend books based on rooms in your home. Here are some examples. Could be as simple as, for the kitchen, I'd recommend Sweet Bean Paste because food, but could also be something as detailed as I would recommend All the Light We Cannot See for my living room because I love the color of the cover and wish my living room wall was that beautiful. So those are a couple of jumping off points for you, Regan.
I had to pick this one because Regan also just got a house, and you're making some really fun renovation content on your Instagram and stuff, so everyone needs to go check that out. I've really been enjoying them. Your kitchen is beautiful. Well, that green
Good news. The book recommendation centers the kitchen. So my kitchen's like a sage green color. All my cabinets are very green, which makes me feel, it's very outside, kind of gives me some cottagecore-esque vibe. So I thought, what better than to recommend one of my go-to cottagecore leaning fantasy stories, which is going to be Daughter of the Forest by Juliette Marillier. If you want something that is like so nature and atmosphere focused, like this is a great book for you. It is dark. Like it has quite a few triggers intermixed. Like it very much has like a classic quest structure, but it is also rather emotional and dark. So keep that in mind. But it's basically set, so Juliette Marillier often writes a lot of folklore and mythology-based stories centering Ireland. So if you can think of like landscape vibes, that's kind of what she's pulling from. In this book, we follow a young girl who's like the youngest child of this family. The father gets remarried, evil stepmother vibes, everyone is cursed, and now she has to go on a quest to save them, but she also doesn't have a voice now. So she has to like travel and like go to these faraway lands and like try to find the solution to save those she loves most. And there's like lots of harrowing situations that she has to deal with. But I just think like Juliette Marillier just creates such a wonderful setting, and nature and again growth is like really a large part of her books. It's a book I actually read recently. It's a beloved book. A lot of people read it a lot growing up. I wish I read it growing up. I feel like it would have been a predominant personality trait if I did, but I'm happy to have read it now. It's just really beautiful, and it's a good, in my opinion, like example of a style of fantasy I really enjoy. Like I love a fairy tale-esque type of story, and I feel like it's a really good one for that.
That's awesome. You guys, thank you so much for all of your bookish answers and your bookish recommendations. I know that it's going to mean a lot to people that are a little sick of hearing me and Regan's constant repetitions. This is a lot of fun. Like I mentioned partway through, I just recorded an episode of Cozy Club, which is Regan and Monica's podcast. They are currently in the midst of their season 2, spring edition. So if you guys want to check that out, it is linked in our show notes and in our description, along with Regan and Monica's Instagrams and YouTube channels. They're a lot of fun. I really recommend their stuff, so definitely check it out. Thank you guys so much for being on here, and we'll catch everyone next week. Yeah, thanks.
Bye.